Superheroes are great examples of growing through trauma. In this video, we'll be talking about how Bruce Banner's commitment to integrating the Hulk into his personality and thereby becoming Professor Hulk is a great example of post-traumatic growth. If this sounds interesting, keep watching. Hi, I'm Christine, and this is the video channel of Project FanCare, a nonprofit dedicated to using film, TV, and fandom to heal from and deal with depression, anxiety, and trauma. If you're new here, please subscribe and follow us on all our social media to keep up to date on the events that we're planning and to be part of the Project FanCare community. I recently interviewed Dr. Ariel Landrum. She is a licensed marriage and family therapist and a certified art therapist practicing in Reseda, California. She has been using teletherapy since 2015 and is a self-identified geek therapist using pop culture and her fandoms to guide her clients toward mental wellness. When I interviewed Ariel, we started out talking about how she uses the Hulk when working with children and adults with anger issues and impulse control. But we ended up talking about him as a wonderful example of post-traumatic growth, because Bruce Banner used the pain and trauma that he experienced to integrate into his personality and become a better version of himself. And as a result of my conversation with Ariel, I now have a new appreciation for Bruce Banner and the Hulk. A character that, to me, used to be the least interesting Avenger, has now, I realize, become a model of post-traumatic growth. Keep watching and find out how you can use his journey as a model for becoming a stronger, wiser version of yourself. So we'll just sort of jump in.
Okay.
You use pop culture in your work with clients a lot. And one of the things you use is you're a Marvel fan, and one of the things you use is the Hulk. Oh, you wore your shirt. Okay, good.
There he is. There he is.
Oh, yeah. You use pop culture and Marvel specifically in your practice with clients, and you use the Hulk specifically for clients who have trouble with anger management. Take me through the process of, let's see, after you've met a client, you've established you've got a Marvel connection and they understand the Hulk. How do you use it? I mean, first of all, talk about who you use it with, and then how you use it in your therapy.
So I do use this intervention or analogy with particularly service members, both active and retired. I do work with a lot of military members. And then I work a lot with children with like impulse control. And often anger management can be seen an inability to set boundaries around impulses.
Let's start with a service member who has PTSD and having had complex PTSD, I know one of those symptoms is hypervigilance or explodes in anger. How exactly do you use the Hulk as a model, as a symbol, as a paradigm to help them integrate their own anger?
Absolutely. So it's been a lot easier now since the most recent Marvel movie of Infinity and Endgame. And what we noticed specifically in Endgame is that they've introduced sort of the character of Professor Hulk. And he is his holistic self. And he even describes it himself in the scene when he's talking with Ant-Man, is that he's saying, I saw the Hulk as the disease, and I instead accepted him as the cure. And now I put the brains and the brute together. And we talked about, he becomes such a, spoiler alert, important person in this movie. Because
I think there's pretty much no one who has not, especially with the quarantine, no one who hasn't seen Endgame.
But he's the one who gets to put on the actual Infinity Gauntlet. He's the one who gets to sort of bring everybody back, right? And it's because he was able to physically withstand what would happen using all of those stones. And he was able to mentally understand what he was doing, right? And so when I'm working with a service member and this service member has PTSD, we talk about, examples of when you feel sort of explosive rage. And we even utilize the hypervigilance, because when we are introduced to the Hulk in the beginning of the movies, we often see him very aware of things that could trigger him to Hulk out, right? So to a sense where he's so focused on preventing hulking out that it ends up making the hulking out worse, right? And so we find those connections and we talk about them. And then we talk about how anger is not a bad emotion. My personal stance and the way that I work with feelings is that emotions are not bad or good. They are motion. They're chemicals in our body meant to move us forward. And oftentimes what's under anger is needing to seek justice, needing to find comfort or peace. And so we look at, in what ways is your anger telling you that you're uncomfortable, that you're not safe? And oftentimes we choose anger because it is a physical feeling. It feels like we could do something. And so we look at the Hulk and we know that Hulk smash, right? Hulk destroy, Hulk out. Like we see this sense of this big green brute that can be very destructive. But when he embraces that I have this strength and I can use it for positive, for good, for building, for change, for literal world changing, then we see that this energy can feed us in a way that is positive and motivating and forward movement. So we talk about what are the things that brings out your Hulk, right? And how can you look at that Hulk and embrace him as someone that's necessary for you to be able to live your world?
And as I was thinking about it, I actually have never thought about the Hulk a lot. I was always a Captain America girl because I call him the king of deontological ethics, because his whole worldview and everything is something I really get behind. And I've read a lot of essays on people talking about Iron Man's development arc through the stories. Only now am I thinking about, well, that can in some respects be seen as one of Bruce Banner's major character arcs or character transformations, is his ability to integrate that anger, something he saw as negative, into his personality and use it as a positive.
Absolutely. It's a beautiful story arc. If you're thinking about, like, he makes the joke like, hey, I can wear a shirt now, it fits, right? And then you see him in another scene where he hands tacos to Ant-Man because his taco got dismantled. And that to me is such a beautiful scene, because we see images of Hulk prior where he can't grasp things. It's so physically, and he doesn't have the physicality to do it because everything is hard and rough. And so everything's with a hard grip. We don't see him opening doors. And now we're seeing that he can work with intricate tools. We can see him, literally developing a time-space machine. And so that is mastery and skill that he definitely had as Bruce Banner, but he didn't have as Hulk. But as Professor Hulk, he was able to marry the two in such a beautiful way that he found both of his strengths.
And one of the things you said a few minutes ago made me think of the scene where he puts on the Infinity Gauntlet and he says, it's like I was made for this. When you were talking about being able to integrate his brain as Bruce Banner and his strength as the Hulk. And yeah, it made me think of when he says I was made for this, it even goes back to the beginning of his character. And what he's always seen as a liability now becomes a strength, and it makes him the only person physically able to do it.
Yes, and it also highlights what we call sort of like trauma resilience, or resilience that we gain after trauma. So he had a traumatic event happen to, his body was physically changed, his mind was physically changed, vast amount of chemicals, feeling like a failure. Feeling that unloved, feeling unapproachable, and realizing that there was growth from that and strength from that. That is a different way of being, and finding meaning and purpose through trauma from the resilience you gain. That is, it's a new type of strength. That doesn't mean that you didn't have it. It means that it wasn't needed to be accessed, and now it can be.
And I think it was in one of the last live panels I was able to do. We started to talk a little, the psychologist I had on the panel started to talk a little bit about post-traumatic growth.
Yeah.
And that's something that definitely I've experienced. And actually, I talk a lot about it in my other videos. But to me, the Hulk is a perfect example of that. Can you define post-traumatic growth for me?
Okay, post-traumatic growth is the actual change our entire being goes through after experiencing a trauma, and looking back and making meaning of ourselves in the context of that trauma. And a part of it can be seen as viewing the story, living the story, and then resolving the story of the trauma. But another part of it can be, what is the acceptance that you've gained, and what have you learned from? And what does this tell you about who you are? Oftentimes when people experience trauma and learn from trauma, what they learn about themselves is that they have a lot more abilities and capability than possibly when that trauma occurred, or that they can now access because they have found themselves needing to grow from trauma.
Now, regular watchers of this channel know that I have always been a Captain America girl. And recently, beginning with his character arc in Ragnarok and Infinity War and Endgame, I've also gained a new appreciation for Thor. But up until this conversation, I really wasn't much interested in the Hulk. But after talking to Ariel, I've gained a new appreciation for him as a model of post-traumatic growth. His character arc, from seeing the Hulk as something foreign and scary and something to be avoided, to integrating the Hulk's characteristics into his Bruce Banner personality, is a great example of using our own pain and trauma to gain new strength and new coping skills that we didn't have before. And it is, I think, his primary character arc through all the Marvel movies. As a result, he became the only Avenger capable of wielding the Infinity Gauntlet. Bruce Banner couldn't have wielded it because he wasn't strong enough, and the Hulk couldn't have wielded it because his strength was mindless and destructive and uncontrollable. It was only Professor Hulk who could do it. And Professor Hulk only came into existence because Bruce Banner did the hard work of processing his trauma. Now, I would love to hear from you. How has the Hulk or any other Avenger helped you, or been a model for you, or shown you that you can get through some of the crap life throws at us? If you like this content and you want to make sure you don't miss a video, please subscribe. And if you want to hear more about how film, TV, and fandom can help us deal with depression, anxiety, and trauma, or if you want to hear more about my own personal story, check out our playlists.